Well, Rube, the 2021 draft in the books, all done. Eagles make 9 picks. What do you think?
I think ask me in 2 years. It's always tempting to grade drafts and evaluate them.
I want to grade. Pass, fail. What'd they do?
The reality is we don't know. I think what I like is that they were true to their board, and so now it comes down to evaluations, whether their evaluations were correct. If you're not true to your board, you're reaching for people if you draft for need. And there's always an element of drafting for need. You're basically drafting best available at a position of need. But my initial impression is I don't see any. I mean, Dickerson at 37 scares me because of the injuries, but obviously he's potentially a all-pro type of player, so it's a huge risk reward. But there's no single pick that kind of makes me say, what the hell were they thinking? There wasn't that. I know a lot's going to be made about not taking a cornerback, at least not one till today. But the reality, and we'll get into this a little more detail, is that value and where they were picking just didn't meet. They just didn't match up. And the right thing to do there is exactly what they did and stay true to the board. And, I think the reality is that Horn and Surtain might be the only two guys that are starting from day one anyway. So if you're, maybe the Northwestern kid will, Newsom, maybe, Farley, well, we don't know, but I think once they didn't have a shot at those two, I'm not sure how much help they would have gotten immediately anyway. They still have an issue at cornerback, but I understand why they didn't, reach to take one. So overall, I think it seems like they did a good job. It seems like scouting and coaching and front office were all on the same page, which is different. And it seemed different. People could be pulling our legs. People could be full of it. People could be lying, but I didn't sense that. And I, after talking to Andy Weidel and Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni, I got the feeling they were all pulling in the same direction.
I should mention this is the Eagle Eye podcast brought to you by Car Shop, one certified used cars reconditioned like new. That's Car Shop, formerly Car Sense. He's Reuben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. I hope people weren't just like sitting in the wrong class for that 5 minutes. Like, oh man, I wonder if this is the right podcast or not.
Remember that show Columbo? Did you ever watch Columbo? Peter Falk?
A little before my time.
Great show. Well, it's on now. They're making new episodes, but Columbo is a great show. The one cool thing they did was the show would open. It was a Sunday night, what was it, a CBS mystery movie, I think, with McLeod and McMillan and wife. They would rotate. And they would go like the first 7 minutes of the show before they showed any of the opening credits. So like they would like really set up the show and go deep into the characters and really pull you in. And then the opening credits would show. So that's what this podcast reminded me of. We kind of, we pulled everyone in, Dave. Now we got them.
All right. Thanks, Columbo. Let's take a look at what we're going to talk about.
Just one more thing
in this podcast. We're going to go through every pick. And you kind of touched on it already in your soliloquy that, we'll talk about the importance of staying true to the board, and that's what Howie Roseman kind of stressed in his post-draft press conference. He also really stressed their wanting to build on the lines. We'll talk about Zach Ertz. He's still a Philadelphia Eagle, despite some reports that said he'd be gone in the first few days of the draft. That didn't happen. He's still on the team. And then we'll kind of give our overall thoughts on the haul of picks. But you started to talk about it, staying true to the board. And look, we have no idea if they did. I mean, it looks like they did because there were no positions where you're like, man, that player was a real reach. I don't feel like that was ever a thought necessarily. Like you can make that case, like maybe some people thought Zach McPherson was, but I don't think that's the case. He was kind of, there was like a mismatch of the way people had him graded, but I don't think that was a reach. I don't think they reached anywhere. The one thing I did want to bring up is that I agree with you that maybe their needs and the value didn't line up for a cornerback at 37 or maybe even 73. But they had all these picks and they had a need. If there were players, they could have moved, right? And I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit, but you have these picks, you have the flexibility to move into a range where that cornerback would have lined up value, right? So I mean, that's the argument of, well, you didn't get a corner, and you say, well, the value, but then you say, well, we'll get into a position where the value makes sense.
Well, two things come to mind. A, you need a team willing to get, to make a deal, and you can't always do that to get into that range. But also, I don't think this year's about that. I think, I think they're looking at like, we can sign some 31-year-old veteran, put him out there. We can, Howie mentioned the Darby trade in August of 17 for Jordan Matthews with Buffalo. They got a corner at the last minute. So he knows that they need a corner, and they're going to add a corner. I think everything is about 2022 and starting, and trying to be good in 2022. So if you feel like you can trade up and get a corner, but you're going to miss out on a player this year that is going to be helping you in 2 years, but next year you have a chance to get that corner, maybe a better chance to get a guy that lines up, value wise, then why do it? Why trade up and lose a player that you like now? Because I don't think there's an urgency like with Darby. I mean, they knew they had a really good team. They knew that they just needed a second cornerback more than they needed Jordan Matthews, who was coming off a pretty good year. This isn't like that. I think they can give up 500 yards a game as long as they're ready on opening day of 2022 to compete for something. I think that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and I mean, it certainly looks like they went with their best player, and it seems like they put a higher value on the lines, which is kind of their MO, and it's been their MO. It was unfortunate for them that the whole Donahoe thing happened, because if that doesn't happen, we're probably looking at this draft going, hey, I believe them that everything. And look, that was one clip of a 3-day draft, but it gave the appearance that they weren't all pulling the same direction. Whereas if we didn't see that and we looked at these picks, I think everyone would go, okay, yeah, I think there were no reaches. There was no Rager at 21, where that's not a indictment on him as a player, but at that spot, I think the value, and certainly we learned that they kind of went against their board last year. I don't know if this is like a long-term change with Howie, but I think he realized after last year that that's not a way to go through the draft. I mean, you can't dismiss your personnel staff like that and be successful. So Andy Weidel was asked point blank today if he felt like his voice was being heard enough. And if he felt like it wasn't, he certainly wouldn't have said it. But it's an important theme of this draft, I think.
Yeah, and you can tell by the way someone answers a question, how genuine their answer is, how passionate their answer is, how you can tell sometimes. And maybe you're not going to be 100% on that, but I've been around these guys for a long time, not Nick, but I've been around Howie for 20 years. And I mean, I know when he's lying. I don't know how else to say it. You can tell. I sense that. I actually thought the last couple of days he came across as genuine and non-BS-y as he ever has, ever. I thought his answers were, he acknowledged that the perception. He acknowledged, I understand why you feel this way. I understand why, he wasn't defensive at all. Whether the questions are about injuries, like, Dickerson's injuries or not taking the corner or whatever. And the same way with his answer about Donahoe. So, and then, the Eagles play damage control with, they sent out a little video of Gannon celebrating like crazy after the Milton Williams pick. Everyone's not going to always agree.
Yeah, and that matters, by the way. I know they did that as kind of a, PR move, but that matters to see how excited he was, because if anyone would have wanted a defensive back there, you'd think it would have been him. Yeah. Former defensive backs coach. He's the defensive coordinator, former scouting background too. So the fact that he was on board with the pick, and he not just on board with it, I mean, he looked like he was about to jump through a wall. That matters. It does.
Not a former scouting background. He still has a scouting background. He's a
Yeah, I
former
meant to say
scout.
former scout, and then I combined it with scouting background. So,
But it comes down to this: would you rather Gannon is thrilled with the pick or Tom Donahoe, who's an advisor? And nothing against Tom. I think he's a really important voice in that room. But if Gannon was reacting that way, then I'd be really concerned.
what now? What?
If the
How about
roles
this?
were,
How about this deep conspiracy theory? Today they got back into the war room and they looked at that video and said, "All right, Jeff, you stand here. Howie, you stand here. Jonathan, you stand here. We're going to recreate it. We'll cut out. We'll be different angles. So we'll pretend Tom was over here and we'll just recreate
yeah, who would have pulled that off in that organization?
it." They hired Spielberg. Well, Jeffrey has the
He does
film background.
have a movie background. Bob Lang could probably pull that off. Yeah.
That's my deep conspiracy theory
Well,
for this draft.
I think I did see a barbecue sauce stain on Casey Weidel's shirt that wasn't there the first time.
I like that.
So yeah.
Eagles built on the lines in this draft, and
Yeah.
how we talked about it. He had a good one-liner about as long as I'm here, we're going to do that. And he also said we built our last championship team doing this, and we're going to build our next one doing this.
That was a good line.
It was a good line. The lineman Landon Dickerson, Milton Williams, Marlon Tui Pulotu. I nailed that, right? Tui Pulotu. Then you have Teron Jackson, and really I'm going to include Patrick Johnson in this. They list him as linebacker, but my sense is he's more of an edge stand-up rusher. So, I mean, you can argue that 5 of their 9 picks are linemen. That's significant.
It is. And I think they understand. And this goes back to Andy Reid. And Andy Reid taught Howie the importance of building on the lines. And Andy's still doing it. And he's winning Super Bowl. He won a Super Bowl, got to another one. He's been to 3 with that philosophy. And the Eagles have been to 2 really with that philosophy. So it works. It's not fun on draft day, but when Trey Thomas is going to his 5th Pro Bowl, or, Lane Johnson's going to his, killing people when he's healthy, or, Brandon Brooks, it means something, and there's a reason teams do it. Good teams do it. And I think Howie alluded to, look, I know they're not fun picks for fans. They're not. Fans like fast guys, and they like corners, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs. And I understand that. I don't know how they feel about linebackers because I haven't taken one in a while, but it's the right way to do it. Now if they had gone line, like, at 10 or at 12, that would have, even if it was Slater, I wouldn't have been thrilled with that pick. I think he'll be a really good player. But I do think once obviously with the caveat that Dickerson can be a healthy, have a long, healthy career. I think the balance of line and not line is kind of right where it should be, really.
Yeah, it makes sense. And had they drafted a lineman in the first round, he's not necessarily a starter. And I do kind of subscribe to that. Like, you draft a player in the first round, he should probably start for you.
True. And again, and we've talked about this, but, Fletcher, Brandon Brooks, Brandon Graham, Kelsey, and Lane Johnson, they're all in their 30s, and they're not going to be here forever. We started to see, see that exodus with JP, and his time was up. So they've got to think about these things. I mean, we'd all love, Kelsey and Brandon Brooks and Lane to anchor that right side of the O-line forever, but it's not the reality. And BG's still playing at a really high level. Fletcher's still really good, maybe not quite. I think Brandon's playing as well as he ever has. Fletcher maybe not quite there. But on both sides of the ball, their best players are linemen, and they're all in their 30s, and they got to start thinking about replacing them. And that's what a big part of today was, or these last 3 days.
Yeah. Let's go through the picks. And I first wanted to mention, I like the trade Howie sent a really late 6th round pick, number 225, and then number 240 in the 7th round to Washington. They picked up a 5th rounder next year. That made sense. They didn't need to draft 11 players this year. They get a better pick in a year where the draft is presumably going to be deeper. So first off, I thought that that trade was a no-brainer for them.
Yeah, and it was less work for you. So that was
Well,
one
that's
less
true.
story for
That's
each
true.
of us.
That's true. All right, let's go through the picks for today. There were 6 picks, so we'll kind of motor through them and we'll give our thoughts on them.
When you motor away.
4th round, 123, Zach McPherson, Texas Tech. Interesting, first off, the name, it's Zek, Z-E-C-K, and he says it's pronounced Zach, which is
Although
going to
Andy
take some
Weidel
getting
called
used
him
to.
Zach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But
his name is Zechariah.
yeah.
So
He said it's pronounced Zach, so I'm
Zach.
going to call him Zach. In fact, it
Yeah.
was Zach Berman asked him how to pronounce it. He says, can I ask you how you pronounce your name? And he said, yeah, it's Zach. I thought he was going to say, yeah, mine too. But he didn't. He just said, thank you, sir, as Zach Berman does. But the only corner they took, Howie mentioned that he can play inside or outside we never had a chance to follow up on that. It was something I was wondering about because I know there's a sense that he's mainly going to be a slot or suited to the slot. But Howie said he's versatile. I think it was a question about versatility because a lot of these guys they took are not position specific, but he said he can play outside. I still don't think he's going to be a starter on day one. That would surprise me. But I think he's got,
well, I mean, are you considering the Nicholas starter? Because right now he would be, right?
Well, right now he would be. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you might be better off with Maddox in the slot and this kid outside just because the enemy we know is better than the enemy we don't know. But
5'10.5", so
yeah.
a little shorter than you'd think Gannon's going to want his outside corners, but it's not like he's 5'9".
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough place, honestly, to find an impact corner. I was looking up the last corner the Eagles drafted in the 4th round to really make an impact, 4th round or later. I mean, Jalen Mills had a really good 17, but you have to go back to Joe Lavender. I think he was drafted in 73. It's a tough place to find cornerbacks. So, it's maybe he can play on special teams, find a role, and who knows? I mean, he could be, become a factor on defense, but it's not super likely.
Yeah, it was interesting. The opinions on him were so split. And this was great work by our Eagles producer, Mike Mulhern. He went through and he found the rankings for 4 of the top draft analysts. And Zach McPherson, Dane Brugler had him 122 on his top 300. Mel Kiper didn't have him in his top 150. McShay had him at 317 of 350. And Daniel Jeremiah had him 85th out of 150. So, I mean, opinions really split on him. The one thing I have read, honestly, I didn't watch a lot of Texas Tech. I wasn't super familiar with him, but Pro Football Focus really seemed to like him, and it seems like he really thrived in zone. So maybe a little hint there of what's to come for the Eagles defense.
Yeah, I think that's true. And Daniel Jeremiah was raving about the kid. He said he thought he's the most underrated corner in the draft. At the point that he was drafted, he was the last corner in DJ's top 100 players. I think, would you say 83? I think he had him 85 overall. I mean, all those guys know their stuff. I really trust Daniel Jeremiah probably as much as anybody. Him and Lance Zierlein. I just think they're so. I think Chris Sims does a great job too. But anyway, who knows? Nobody knows. I don't think it's a bad pick, but I wouldn't expect them to come in and solve the Eagles' corner issues right away either.
That's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. In the 5th round, pick 150, Kenneth Gainwell, the running back from Memphis. I'm guessing we both really like this pick. He's someone we've spent a lot of time talking about, I think, on the pod and just the two of us. You looked at players that made sense for the coaching staff, and Gainwell was such an easy connection to what Nick Sirianni wants to run. I mean, he's Nyheim Hines. He's going to be that role that Hines has, and Hines is a special player now. I mean, I don't know. Gainwell is coming in as a rookie, but Nyheim Hines has done a really nice job in Indy. He's been such a dynamic, unique playmaker for them. if Gainwell can do that, I love that pick.
Yeah, he's probably a better natural receiver than Miles. I think, and I've written this 100 times in 100 different ways, but Nick Sirianni is going to run the ball more than Doug Peterson, and significantly more. I mean, the Colts offense averaged just over 5 carries per game more than the Eagles after Frank left, during the period that Frank was in Indy, and he wasn't here. Obviously, he wasn't in both places at the same time. I don't think it's a knock on Miles Sanders, but two things. And I think that Miles has been hurt. I think, he's a guy that probably isn't ideally a high volume guy. And I think a lot of offenses have, 1 and 1A as running backs. And it's not a knock on, I mean, you look at the Eagles in the Super Bowl, Jay Ajayi, LeGarrette Blount, and Smallwood and Corey Clement had their roles too. You don't need, and I think Doug kind of got away from that. Boston Scott's a nice change of pace guy, and he had some great moments against the Giants. But if you want a two-headed monster, you don't. I mean, that's not Boston Scott's strength. That's not what he does. So now you have Gainwell and Miles, and I think they have some similarities, but I think they complement each other. I think Miles is a guy that you just don't want his workload to be super high. I don't think any back should be super high, really, unless he's a, real physical, unique specimen. So I think you can do a lot of things. He's a really good receiver, and a Gainwell, that is, and it's gonna be fun to watch him. 5th round, who knows? But I'm really curious about him, and curious how. I think that if he is what they think he is, I think he'll have a role, and I think you'll take some of the pressure off Miles. And he's still going to be a big part of what they do. But the more you can keep a team off balance, the more you can hit them with different skill set backs. And I think when you have the same back running every play for 22, 24 carries, they're predictable. The other team, the defense gets a beat on them. They know what the guy has. They know his moves. If you can hit a guy with different styles, keep guys fresh, keep throwing fastballs, as Big Red said, you're a more dangerous offense, a more unpredictable offense.
Those fastballs were about edge rushers, weren't they?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, you're right.
I like, it just makes sense. And I think we're going to see him catching balls out of the backfield. I think they're going to line him up in the slot at times. I think that he's going to be used in a variety of different ways. And I think he will have a role day one. One of the good things about him is that he's a pretty good blocker already. He's certainly a willing blocker. So, that's the thing that normally keeps a young running back off the field is, if you can't block, we can't have you out here because we can't have our quarterback getting killed because you can't chip a guy. He can chip a guy. You can have him out there. You can put him on in a 3rd down situation because you feel comfortable enough to have him block. And that's important. So, I think that's probably my favorite pick, just a personal favorite pick, of this draft. Yeah, it's fun, and it's a player that I really like throughout the whole process. He opted out in 2020, but that 2019 season he had at Memphis was really good. And Memphis is churning out running backs. I mean, I think he's the 4th in the last 2 or 3 years to get drafted. Gibson just last year had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage for Washington. So, I think that was, and especially the value at 150 to get him.
Yeah, I never dreamed he would be there at that pick. I thought he was going to go in the 4th round. I mean, there was talk he would be a 3rd rounder, and I'm excited to see what did. One hallmark of all these guys is versatility and being able to do different things. Like you said, he can run, he can block, he can catch. Pretty much all these guys that we're talking about can do different things. And I think that's going to be a hallmark of both Gannon's defense and Sirianni's offense is unpredictable, versatile, and just kind of keeping teams off balance and not knowing who's going to be where at any particular time, just being as unpredictable as possible.
The next picks, we finally get into the 6th round. And for a while, I thought they were going to make every pick in the 6th round because they had 4 going in. They ended up taking 3 players in the 6th round. The first was 189, and they take defensive tackle Marlon Tui Pelotu. To me, this is the best example of them sticking with their board, taking a player regardless of position, because they already have defensive tackles. They already drafted one in this class in the third round, and they still took a defensive tackle from USC because he was their highest rated player.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. And all the guys they drafted today were pretty cool talking to them. They were all like really personable, and they all seemed like real team guys. Yeah, he was cool. Who knows how much he'll help? The D tackle position, right now, I mean, there's a log jam. They brought Ridgeway back, and behind Javon and Fletch. But if the guy, either on the practice squad or on the roster, have a chance to sit back and learn and see what we can get out of him.
Yeah, we'll see how that works. Interesting with him, he was thought to be a higher pick. I mean, for him to last to the sixth round, and there was some talk about medical concerns. He didn't want to talk about it. He actually declined to talk about it. He said he'd rather not.
Very
obviously, very politely. I think that's probably the reason he fell, if I had to guess. Obviously, the Eagles cleared him, and this is much different to me than taking Landon Dickerson. I mean, the risk obviously involved in taking a second round pick. I'm cool with using one of your 3 6th-round picks on an injured guy or a guy with injury concerns, because the risk is obviously not as high.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the Dickerson pick scares me though, man. I'm telling you, I know we're not talking about yesterday's picks, but I don't know. What's your gut feeling on him? Which way does that go?
On who?
On Dickerson. I'm going off script here.
Yeah, you are. I don't know how it goes. I know I would have made the pick. Yeah. I just know that and the upside is huge, and maybe it'll really pay off. I just wouldn't have made the pick.
It's interesting. We talked to Howie again about him and about his injuries in a little more detail, and a couple of things. I mean, he admitted, it's a risk, but it's a risk we wanted to take. He was asked to, the Sidney Jones thing is always going to come up, and he said, different position, I mean, a guard center is not going to be running down the field like a cornerback. And if you lose a step as a corner, you're done. If you lose a step as a guard, nobody notices. But they kept talking about what a character guy he is, and like character is going to win out over injuries. I mean, if that was the case, Cornelius Ingram would have been an all-pro. But yeah, I don't really understand. Well, he's overcome, we really admire his ability to overcome adversity. Well, you actually want to get a guy that's really good at bouncing back from injuries. I don't know. But anyway, Tui Pelotu, we'll see. I do like the fact that they brought in a couple D tackles, and we'll see how they sort out. I think didn't last year they drafted linebackers in the 3rd and 6th round, and this year D tackles in the 3rd and 6th round.
Yeah.
That's hopefully the kind of thing you would notice.
I wouldn't notice?
That you would notice.
I would notice, yeah. In the 6th round with the 191st pick, Teron Jackson from Coastal Carolina. Admittedly, was not watching a lot of Coastal games, but certainly the production's there. And I know one of their best games of the year came against BYU. He didn't have a sack in that game, but he was really active, moved the pocket. Interesting body build for him. He's short, and he's like a stocky build type of defensive end. Typically, if I were drafting in a late round, I'd want someone with a prototypical body type that really, like a Josh Sweat type, or Janarius Robinson. I don't know where he went from Florida State, like someone like that. But there's some upside with him. And I know the production wasn't at, he didn't have however many 26 sacks in the SEC, but he was a productive player. And I don't know where he fits in, but in the 6th round, you're throwing darts.
Yeah. There's not much I could say about him, except it's hard to imagine an edge from Coastal Carolina coming into the league and being a factor, but anything's possible. Jason Kelsey was a 6.
Yeah, and I mean, the small school guys get overlooked, and sometimes they're still figuring out how to play, honestly, when they're at that age. So we've seen small guys or small school guys come in
Oh,
and get
absolutely.
better.
And sometimes they're not getting the coaching. This is not a knock on Coastal Carolina staff. I don't know anything about them, but sometimes you're not going to get the coaching out of Coastal Carolina that you're going to get at, Alabama, Oklahoma, or Auburn, or,
See,
something
the
like that.
Alabama long snapper got drafted.
He's a good one. Dude can flat out snap.
I mean, Alabama's got long snappers getting drafted. That's insane.
Yeah.
And he was right before one of the Eagles picks. I was like, got him right from the Eagles. In the sixth round, the last sixth round pick, they had 224. Jacoby Stevens from LSU played safety. The Eagles list him at linebacker. I'm assuming he's going to play some sort of hybrid position here, and he even like started talking about some of his favorite hybrid linebacker safety players, the Derwin Jameses of the world. But uh, I like that pick. I think there's a lot of upside with a guy like that. And it was funny on Twitter. I mentioned that they've done this before. They drafted Nate Gary in the fifth round from Nebraska. He was a safety. And people were all mad at me, but Nate Gary was not a bad pick. Nate Gary was asked to do too much. He would have been a fine fifth round pick. And in the sixth round, I think Jacoby Stevens has even more upside than Nate Gary had in 2017 as a fifth round pick.
No, I would agree with that. He's an intriguing guy. I think he's limited in what he can do. I don't think you want him as a deep safety, but he's a good tackler. He can stop the run. He can get to the quarterback. I think he can cover. He can cover a back out of the backfield. I think he's got more linebacker skills than safety skills. But I think if you're creative with him, you can find ways to use him. I think he's an intriguing guy. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him and where he fits in. I don't think he'll ever be a guy that's going to give you, 60 snaps, 50 snaps a game. But used the right way, I could see him making an impact. I'm really curious. I can't wait till we get to talk to Gannon, who we still haven't talked to.
Yeah, I wish. I mean, for these last two picks, especially, I wish we could have talked to the defensive coordinator because they drafted guys and they listed them as something other than what they were listed at in college. And to draft a player like that, you have to have a plan for how to use them. And it just stinks that we don't have the opportunity to talk to them.
Yeah. So, but intriguing pick and another kind of, I really like how aware he was of the fact that he's a tweener. He's a hybrid. He talked about his limit. He's got limitations. That's why he was drafted where he was drafted, but he's also got some strengths, and it's up to the coaching staff to, keep him out of situations that he's bad at and find ways to use him and use his strengths. He was very aware of that, and he talked about positionless football and the wave of the future. And, it'll be interesting to see where he fits in.
Smart kid, by the way. Very astute. My favorite answer he gave, and I ended up asking Nick Sirianni about it, was he basically gave a scouting report on Devontae Smith. And one of my favorite things he mentioned, this is exactly what I specifically asked Nick Sirianni, was he said Devontae Smith makes every route look the same, which is so important. And it's such a wise beyond your years type of thing for a college kid to do. And it was fun asking Sirianni about it because I was like, I think at any point, if I don't have coffee and I need to get woken up, I'm going to ask Sirianni about wide receiver play.
Yeah, he gets fired up. How about Howie giving him grief about the rock, paper, scissors yesterday?
That was funny.
That was pretty good. I mean, when Howie's mocking you, that's, but he's like, you can tell he's going to be a coach. He'll be a coach one day. Eagles just have to hope it's not
not soon. Yeah. The last pick, number 234 in the seventh round, Patrick Johnson from Tulane, edge player. They listed at linebacker. I'm not buying that. He's not the Mike. I mean, he's not an off-ball linebacker. And he even mentioned that he expects them. The team told him they want him to edge rush and get after the quarterback. He's not doing that as an off-ball linebacker. He's going to rush the quarterback, I would think. Maybe like a stand-up edge rusher. Honestly, he's more of a 3-4 fit. So this pick actually makes me wonder if we're going to see some 3-man fronts from Gannon's defense, and maybe they'll utilize a stand-up pass rusher like an outside backer. And another hint to that is Jannard Avery. We heard that he was switching positions from end to linebacker, and that was kind of confusing to me. But now there's another guy in that same mold, like a stand-up edge rusher, and that I wonder if that's going to be a role in Gannon's defense.
And this scares me, but I was thinking that exact same thing, that there's definitely going to be some odd looks, some 3-4 looks in Gannon's system. I don't know how much, I don't know how often. I don't think it'll be as base, but I think we'll definitely see that.
Yeah, and Gannon, by all accounts, is a really smart guy, and we've made the connections to Zimmer's defense and to Eberflus's defense. This guy has been waiting a long time to be a defensive coordinator. He's gonna have his own wrinkles. He's just gonna. He has ideas that haven't been implemented where he's been. I guarantee that. So the thought that he's gonna have some odd fronts,
Yeah, no question. Hey, beer, wings, sports, put it all together, and PJ Wellahans is the place to get all three. Local sports fans gather together to catch all the action at your neighborhood PJs. Visit pjspub.com to find a location nearest you.
Hey, Rube, Zach Ertz, still a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. Howie asked about him a few times on Saturday evening. The one thing that stood out to me is he said he kind of hammered home that Zach Ertz has value. He said he's not in the twilight of his career, which is basically a signal like, we haven't got an offer that we feel is good enough yet.
Exactly. I still think there's a chance he'll be here. I don't think it's likely, but I think they're playing it the right way. There's no reason to take a 5 for him. There's no reason to just give him away. Somebody could get a tight end hurt in camp. Somebody could, so many things can happen. A team that really needs a tight end and has, been lowballing the Eagles might realize that they're just not going to give them up for less than whatever it is, a 3, 4, probably a 3. And eventually they'll raise their offer. There's no reason for Howie to take less than they feel he's worth. And, unless it's, if it's part of I thought there was a pretty good chance to be gone by today as part of something to move up, but why give them away when you can just wait? Yeah.
And this was brought up on the Zoom call too, but he was asked, like, at what point is it a disservice to the player? Because Zach Ertz is kind of like hanging in the wind right now. And he would probably like to know where he's going to play next year. But I think there is kind of a fine line there. You don't want to screw up the relationship long term with the player. It's already screwed up short term. I think we understand that. But you can't trade him for less than the value you really want because of that.
Yeah, and Zach Ertz is a big boy, and wherever he is, he's gonna make $8 million, a little over $8 million. And if he doesn't know what team he's going to be on for a couple months in the spring, that's part of being a pro. Guys get cut, guys get traded, guys get, it's part of sports, and I think he understands that. I know he's frustrated, but he's going to have a pretty good job wherever he is. And he can go in, if he goes to Buffalo, if he goes to the Colts, he can go in a day before the season and play at a high level. I still think it's most likely he won't be here, but I still think there's a slight chance he will.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see how the trade ends up. I wonder if it could be a player for player trade. Howie's talked about getting a corner, maybe that there would be something there that lines up. And the Eagles.
Somebody even asked Howie that today, right? Somebody said, "Would you trade Zach for a corner?"
Really?
Somebody actually asked that.
Dozing off at that point, but I think that could be in the cards. And the fact that Howie traded picks in this draft to get a pick next draft tells you yeah, they think there's more value in that next draft overall. And they already have 10 picks there. They'd happily take another pick in that draft rather than this draft. So I think that probably led to the lack of a rush here. That they probably didn't feel the urgency because, hey, if we're going to have a pick in this round in this year or that round next year, they probably have it next year, right? I mean, you want more flexibility in the year
Sure.
where you think that the class is going to be deeper. So I still think he's not going to be here.
And
But
not only is the class going to be deeper next year, I think you'll have, I sure hope that there's a combine and that there's, ways to, there's better ways to evaluate players and do it in person and, have full seasons. And I think there'll be a lot better opportunities next year to evaluate players, which kind of translates into more value in the draft as well.
yeah. All right. This is the class. 9 players are already starting to sign the undrafted guys. On our next podcast next week, we'll get into the players the Eagles have signed after the draft. Interested to see. We already know a few of them, but we'll save that for the next time. Overall, like what are your takeaways from this draft class and the last 3 days?
Well, to me, it starts with the wide receiver, and I think they nailed that pick. You have, and I think it's just, I mean, if you have Jalen Hurts at quarterback and you draft Kwity Paye in the first round, I mean, you're not doing him any favors. He's got an elite guy who's not only an elite receiver, but he's a guy that has a background with him. They've played together. They've been friends. I mean, gosh, Jalen recruited him back when he was still at Alabama. He recruited him out of high school. So they've known each other. I mean, that wasn't that long ago, but they've known each other probably, for, 5 years. So I think that's a huge pick for Jalen Hurts. And I feel good about everything they did. And we'll see about Dickerson. It is a risk reward thing. And it comes down to how big a risk. I mean, Howie talked about how their medical people, gave them, equivalent guys who've had similar series of injuries. I can't imagine anyone's had 2 ankles and 2 ACLs before their 23rd birthday, but they feel like he can have a long career. They might have stolen one. I don't know. Maybe they stole one, and this kid's going to play right guard. After Brandon Brooks retires or moves on, for the next 8 years at a high level. He's got the talent to do it. So to me, the whole draft kind of comes down to that pick, because that's 37. That's not just a 2. That's a high 2. That's a high. I'm with you. Yeah. I mean, that's their highest second round pick since Zach Ertz. I think it was 35, maybe. So to me, that pick really determines whether this was a successful draft or not. Because, a couple of the other guys will become contributors. Most of them won't. I think your first round pick is going to be a star. I really do. I think he'll be their best homegrown receiver since, Deshaun Macklin in 08 and 09, which is not saying a whole lot. I understand that, but I guess I'm just saying he'll be better than Jordan Matthews.
No, I mean, if he ends up playing like those guys, I think that's a win.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think he will. I think he's going to be, extraordinary. I really do. A month ago, I wasn't convinced. I tried to read up on him and the way he played and how his size affects him. And he's not soft, he's not, he never missed a game in college. So, I'm sure he had his little nicks and got banged up here and there, but the things you look for from a smaller guy, a lighter guy, the fact that he's 6'1", the fact that he was so successful getting off press coverage against really elite cornerbacks, all the things you worry about with a smaller guy, you don't really, you don't worry about with him. So I feel really good about that pick.
I heard an interesting comp for him talking to people this weekend. And it came up because I covered him at one point, but DeAndre Hopkins, who was, he was a 27th pick back in 2013. Because DeAndre Hopkins was obviously a really good player in college, but didn't do anything spectacularly well, right? Except he had good hands and he would contested catches he would make. but there was not like one thing that he did exceptionally well. But he was just overall a really good player. And when you do this really well, this really well, this really well, this really, all of a sudden you have a player that's a Pro Bowler. So I got that comparison. And I think I like it.
Well, yeah. Well, how could you
Well, I
not
mean,
like?
I think it lines up. Not that obviously if he becomes DeAndre Hopkins, that's great, but I think there's some sense in it.
Yeah, yeah. If you just drafted DeAndre Hopkins, this has been a good draft. I'll go that far. But
But
yeah, I've
I'm
never
like you though. The Dickerson thing,
make or
um,
break.
yeah, and who knows? Look, if they end up with a Kelsey player later in the draft, it could always happen. Maybe Jacoby Stevens becomes an All Pro. It sometimes that happens. You can't bank on that, obviously.
2011, Danny Watkins in the first round, Jason Kelsey in the sixth round.
It
If they
erases
were
it.
flip flopped, everyone's saying it was a brilliant draft.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, if one of those guys becomes a great player, and hey, who knows, maybe they would be, then that's kind of a wild card. But you're right, the Dickerson thing. I think back to 17. I mean, if Sidney Jones works out,
Still a
all of
bad
us.
draft.
No, all of a sudden, I mean, you got a starter in the first round in Barnett, who's a solid starter, not great, not a star, not a bust, but solid. And then you get a starting corner, at least a starting corner in the second round. All of a sudden, that historically bad draft is viewed in a much different light. So
No, that's true.
I don't know. We'll see on Dickerson because I think it's like one way or the other because he's so talented that like I don't think there's a middle ground. I don't think he ends up becoming like a mid to low level starter for 10 years. I don't see the mid level there. I think either he's a really good player and we look back and think, man, they nailed this, or he's out of the league in 3 years because his body has broken down on him.
So he's not like Isaac Sayamalo. He's
I don't
either
think so. Do you see, I don't see a middle ground, and that's scary, but he's the ultimate boom bust, high risk, high reward player to me.
yeah. I don't know if I'd rule out. I mean, he could be just a very good player. That's possible. Who plays, you know, 12, 13, 14 games most years. Um, it's going to be fascinating to watch. I do think, and I kind of agree with you. I'm probably playing devil's advocate too much, but I think if he does play, he's going to be a Pro Bowler. I do. I think if he can stay healthy, he's got all the tools, man. I do think he's a little big to play center at 335. How about the person that DM'd you? That was the greatest tweet. Or
Oh, I thank you for bringing that up. Let me find that person's name because uh yeah, I was really impressed by this, and I'm actually a little annoyed that I didn't think of it, and you're probably annoyed that you didn't think of it. Anthony brought it up to me, and he said, "Has there ever been a draft where the team's first pick or the team's let me rephrase that the team's second pick is twice the size or twice the weight, I should say, of the team's first pick?" And I was like, "Oh my god, that's right. Devontae is 166, and what is
335.
Dickerson listed? 335. So yeah, he's over double the weight of the first round pick.
So of
It's
course I
insane.
took it as a personal challenge to try to find someone. So I went to StatHead and I plugged in every first round pick ever that weighed 175 or less, and then looked up that team's second round pick that year. and the closest I could find, there was never an offensive lineman taken in the second round after any of those guys. There were a couple defensive linemen, but until recently, offensive linemen, not recently, but like 20 years ago, they were 305. So you couldn't do it. The math didn't work. You couldn't go like 155. It just, they weren't big enough. Offensive linemen weren't big enough till like 20 years ago. Defensive linemen were bigger. They were like 290. But the bottom line is I got close with the 49ers. They had like a kicker one year drafted in the first round who was like 160. But the next pick was like, he was a defensive lineman, but he was like, 275. So I spent like way too much time working on it. And then I get a tweet from someone asking if this is the first draft in Eagles history where every player is drafted from a school below the 35th meridian. the 35th meridian. And I look at the chart and I went back, and stupid me, I wasted another 20 minutes. And it's the first time they haven't taken a guy from, over the Mason-Dixon line. And really, once you get back to, well, whenever the draft started, 7 rounds, I think it was 8 rounds one year, but it was 12 up through, I think, the late 80s. Like, once you have 12, I mean, you're going to have somebody from Michigan or Maryland or Temple or Notre Dame or Washington. It's impossible not to. It's the first time they've ever drafted no players from north of the 35th meridian. So we've got, those 2 stats are 2 stats you will never find on any other podcast.
What does it say that people come to us with that stuff?
With the esoterica.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of like it.
Yeah, I do too. Those are 2 good ones. We're going to wrap it up
differently.
Yeah, we're going to wrap this up. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye podcast, and I hope you do if you're listening this long, please rate, subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like, subscribe button there. Thanks for joining us for these 3 podcasts. It's been a lot of fun. The draft is always a blast. A little hokey, but I always love seeing kids get drafted. It's always cool to see the reactions and see how excited they are. And I know Reuben, you've been doing this a long time. You don't get tired of it either, do you?
No, and I think that's my favorite thing about it. Is like, they draft these names, and you hear a name like, whatever it is, Jacoby Stevens, and it's like, it's just a name. And then you talk to the kid, and he's getting emotional, and it's pretty cool. And you dismiss, well, he's a 7th round pick, I don't even want to talk to him. And then the kid's just pouring out his heart about how much this opportunity means to him. And yeah, I'm a softie when it comes to that. And once you get to know them, and it's some of these guys, it's hard not to root for them because of their story and their personality. And yeah, it's pretty cool. It's
and a cool side note, normally we're in the facility for the draft, and we're all crowded around a speakerphone. That's the one cool thing about doing this remotely, is that we actually get to see the faces on Zoom of the kids they've drafted. So you can see the emotion, which is pretty cool.
Well, my favorite part of the draft, being the NovaCare, other than the cashews that they have, is,
God bless you,
running into a draft pick the next day after he flies in the cafeteria, in the hallway, and just having a conversation for a few minutes with this kid, and just sensing his excitement. And just, a lot of these guys have never been in a big city. They've never been, certainly in the Northeast, never been in Philadelphia, and here they are starting their NFL career. And yeah, it's pretty cool to experience that, and to get to know them a little bit. And some of these guys you end up becoming really close with over the years. But it's a fun few days. And the last thing I want to say is, people were tweeting me and asking what my draft grade is. And like I said, I'll tell you in 2 years, because anybody who says this was a great draft or a terrible draft, the reality is you just never know. You never know for a couple of years. So, how do guys respond to being away from home? How do they respond to having, a huge signing bonus, relatively huge for some of them, really, really huge, having money for the first time, a new scheme, maybe a more complicated scheme, being away from their friends, their family. There's just so much that goes into being a pro, and you just, and then you can't predict it. That's why they look for, you talk about quality people who can, who can handle that. But you just don't know for a couple of years. You listen to TV, and every pick is, oh, this is a great pick. I love this kid. That about a third of them are going to make it in this league as starters, maybe in the first couple rounds. So you never know. And ask me in 2 years, and we'll talk about it.
All right, I'll ask you in 2 years.
I guess I should grade the Eagles 2019 draft now, but I'm not going to do that.
I'd like to wrap this up, please.
I know you
need to get some sleep. All right, thanks everyone. We'll talk to you next week.